from. But we've got enough evidence. And Justin Williams, theathletic.com. We've had Justin on before. He's on with us again. Justin with Craig Smoak. Out today, it's with Paul Catalina and David Smoak. Justin, right now in the Big 12, and thank you for your time. I'm glad you had a good chance to get a vacation despite me bothering you. Right now, which of the 14, who are the ones that you think in the Big 12 kind of have a little bit of that heat to them as far as the kind of runs they're having with commitments?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we're still looking at the 14, but, in a sense, if you're looking at the 24 class, those guys aren't going to be playing, from Texas and Oklahoma. They won't be playing in the Big 12, right? So it is kind of, we include them when we're talking about it right now, but does that really impact Big 12 recruiting? I'm not sure. But, Texas and Oklahoma, they've always recruited well, no matter what they're playing like on the field, maybe in Texas' case. And they're obviously in for some of the big name 5 stars. But you're looking at the other teams, it's hard not to be impressed by what Texas Tech is doing. Joey McGuire, I think, really has things going in a good direction there. And it's not like they're coming off of a big, super successful season. I think there were some positive signs last year. But to see them work in the state, I know they're still in on Micah Hudson. I know Texas Tech fans are kind of like, tapping their fingers, waiting to see when Micah Hudson might announce, but they feel like they're in a good spot with him. So you got to be impressed there. I think TCU, they don't have a ton of numbers. I think they're at maybe 10 commits right now, but their average player rating based on the rankings is really high. I think they've pulled in some really good, 4-star talents out of Texas. And is that the playoff bump? Is that just Sonny Dykes has things moving there? Either way, I think you're encouraged by what they're doing. And then, a couple of teams, West Virginia and Cincinnati, the 2 teams picked at the bottom of the preseason Big 12 standings, one of them being a newcomer in Cincinnati with a new head coach. They're going more volume. I think they both have 18 commits. But, this is a coach who's brand new in his first year in Scott Satterfield, and then West Virginia coaching Neil Brown, who's kind of on the hot seat. I think you have to be encouraged by what both of those squads have done, this spring and summer in terms of bringing guys in and trying to set things up for 24 as well as they possibly can.
Who do you feel is flailing a little bit?
The Houston, I think we've seen the bump from moving into the Big 12 for both Cincinnati and UCF. UCF has had a really good, past couple weeks in terms of getting some big 4-star commitments. They even flipped a 4-star from Cincinnati. Houston and BYU, we haven't really seen it yet in the 24 class. So to me, that part's a little concerning. Again, not necessarily total cause for alarm, but why haven't we seen a Big 12 bump for both of those schools in the 24 class yet? Kansas State only has 7 commits. There's this weird thing where their airport is shut down in Manhattan, which I think is maybe making recruiting a little bit tougher this summer specifically. But, after coming off a really good season and, being one of the challengers for a Big 12 title this season, many think, I'm surprised we haven't seen a little more of a bump from them. And then just the program I can't figure out in general is Oklahoma State. They lost a lot of talent, exiting via the transfer portal. Mike Gundy's kind of been very out there in terms of he understands the changes that are happening and all those kind of things, but we haven't necessarily seen the recruiting reflect, a big push. And then obviously the amount of talent they've lost via the transfer portal is a little bit concerning, but they've been so good over the past decade plus. I'm just not totally sure what to think until we, get out on the field and see if they can kind of rebound from a tough end of last season.
Have you seen, like I've seen, and it appears this way, that UCF and the Big 12 being a part of an Autonomy 5, being a part of a Power 5, even Malzahn was quoted the other day as saying some of these commitments would not happen if they weren't. You see what they could be a sleeping giant?
I mean, certainly in the right spot, right? Being in Florida, and they've had to battle that kind of group of 5 stigma when going against Florida State or Florida or just any Power 5 teams coming into their state. And to their credit, they've been successful over the past 5, 6, 7 years of kind of recruiting those guys in their state who maybe were a little overlooked or didn't have a ton of Power 5 offers. So, yeah, I totally see the appeal of, hey, now we're going to the Big 12. There aren't really any other Big 12 teams in that area, so it's not like they're going against other Big 12 teams. So I think if they can kind of keep the momentum going that they have, sure, there's definitely a little carve-out that they could make in Florida where they can start pushing, yes, we've had success, but now we also have kind of that P5 stage that we're playing on. I think there's definitely, room for to be impressive and to continue growing on the recruiting trail that way.
Who do you think has used the transfer portal the best, and how has that affected their high school recruiting?
Well, that's the other thing that's kind of hard to figure out is are some of these teams saving spots? What are we going to see in terms of high school recruiting classes for the numbers that they add. Texas had a huge class the year before, but so maybe Texas won't need to go as heavy on the high school recruiting side. So I think it'll be interesting to see. We probably need a couple years of data to see how that works out. In general, I've been really impressed with Kansas, what Lance Leipold's doing there. Whether it's high school recruiting or I think they've used the transfer portal really well. And so I'm encouraged there. I think Baylor specifically this past offseason did a really good job in the transfer portal, bringing in some guys who I think could be kind of immediate impact players to maybe bounce back from, again, maybe a disappointing season for them last year. So those are kind of two programs that immediately jump out to me as I think they're really using the transfer portal to their advantage going into a year where they could, feel like they can vie for the top half of the conference standings.
You covered Cincinnati for quite some time, and I think you still do, but now you have even a larger role with the Athletic. How bad was the timing of Fickell leaving as they're about to enter the Big 12?
Yeah, I mean, on one sense, you could say, like, wow, this is the worst possible time to kind of be resetting and having a roster turnover. I think they were already in a little bit of just a natural roster turnover anyways, even if Fickell had come back. It was definitely exacerbated by Fickell leaving and all the changes that came with it. But it's weird to think that, 16 months ago, this was a team that was in the college football playoff playing Alabama in the Cotton Bowl. And at that time, everyone's like, wow, this is going to be, great. They're going to go into the Big 12 and compete right away. I think last year with some of the attrition they had, it made evident that this was going to be a little bit more of a move, of a learning curve going to the Big 12. The biggest thing that I think got hurt with Fickell leaving was their 23 recruiting class. They just lost a lot of guys, decommitments that either went to Wisconsin or decided to go elsewhere. So it's definitely made what was already going to be a challenging process a little bit more difficult. But I've been encouraged, mainly from kind of a recruiting staffing standpoint, what Scott Satterfield has done. I don't think Cincinnati's going to have a great year this season on the field. I think them being picked 13th was fair. I think you could kind of put them anywhere in kind of that bottom chunk because of the coaching change and the roster turnover. But in terms of what they're building future long term, I'm encouraged by what Satterfield has done so far. We'll obviously see how it looks on the field. But I think it might just take a tough year or two getting acclimated to the Big 12 schedule, Big 12 talent, before they really start to kind of pick things up and put things into place.
Why did Emory Jones win that job, given his history?
I guess the question would be, did he win it, or did Ben Bryant, just not like the answer he got coming out of spring football? I think there's a very good chance if Ben Bryant had stayed, he would have won the starting quarterback job in the fall. The sense I get is that they weren't ready to pick between him and Emory Jones. Ben Bryant enters the transfer portal, and it turns out he might have a chance to now start at Northwestern. And I know he had some other big Power 5 conference teams coming after him. So I think part of it was Ben Bryant decided to leave. He didn't want to necessarily wait his last season to see if he was going to win that job, and it almost kind of gave it to Emory Jones. Emory Jones fits Scott Satterfield's system a little bit better on paper than Ben Bryant. Scott Satterfield has always kind of tended towards those dual threat quarterbacks who have an ability to get out and run. That's certainly more of a Emory Jones strength than Ben Bryant. That's not something Arizona State did much with Emory Jones last year, which was kind of curious. I think you're going to see him have a lot more opportunities to move around and create as a quarterback at Cincinnati. But I almost think it was kind of like they were between these two guys. They'd like to hold on to both of them and see how long they could push the competition. And with Ben Bryant deciding to leave it almost just kind of put it in Emory Jones' lap. So
it appears as if the Big 12, we're about to have this, hey, here we are, along with Texas and Oklahoma Wednesday and Thursday, and it's a breath of fresh air. And as a guy that covered Cincinnati, we've had John Cunningham, we've had Satterfield, we've had former players on. But for someone like yourself, and I think we've discussed this with you over the last couple of years since the Texas OU story popped, what, in your opinion, can this mean to Cincinnati? And not if they're ready or not, that happens. But what does this mean to them?
Yeah, I mean, this has been everything that the Cincinnati program and fan base has been, rooting for and honestly dying for the past 10, 12 years. Some people might forget Cincinnati was in the old Big East back when that was part of kind of the 6 BCS conferences, and they went to back-to-back BCS bowls. They were competing at the top level of college football when Brian Kelly was there, Mark D'Antonio, things like that. So then they kind of got left out in the wilderness when that last big realignment shift happened. They ended up in the American. They kind of struggled then under Tommy Tuberville and really hit rock bottom. Luke Fickell built them back up. But this is a fan base that, they knew what it was like to compete at that top level of college football there for a short stretch. And so when they had that taken away from them, that was all that they've been working towards and clamoring for the past 10 to 12 years. And it's been a long process. There were certainly stints in it when fans and even people in the program, the university, were kind of wondering, are we going to have that path back to a power conference? And to have that finally happen, you're right. It might take a little growing pains on the field or on the court, whatever it may be, for the first couple of years. But this is what they've wanted. And so there's definitely a lot of excitement just about being back at that level and, competing against schools week in and week out that value and have as much support for the program as Cincinnati fans feel like they have for the past 10, 12 years.
Justin, I got to know, I asked you to be on the show a couple weeks ago and you couldn't do it because you were at a Taylor Swift concert.
Oh,
what was it like?
True.
The madness.
What was it like? Look, people can make fun of you for going on. You took kids and all that to it, but it seems to be quite a spectacle.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest. I was, kind of tagging along with my wife and my sister. I was certainly, in the Swiftie rankings, I was a distant third with those two. But look, it was a great show. I can't deny it. She played for 3 hours. The stage was great. Her and I are the same age. We've been, roughly as successful in our careers. And so it was nice to go out and just kind of see her put on a show. And it's the same with every city. I have a bunch of friends, a lot of people on staff at the Athletic who are big Swift fans too and have gone to shows. What she is doing in each city for a big swath of my life. I remember when Paul McCartney came here, and then there's been some big concerts. Nothing has even come close to rivaling like the interest and the excitement that those two shows she did in Cincinnati had, in terms of people lining up for her merch truck and people sitting outside the stadium. And it's been like that in every city. So it was kind of cool to go down, and it was a lot of like teenage girls screaming the entire 3-hour show. But I have 3 daughters, so I guess that's what I have to look forward to anyways. But it was definitely a good show and a fun time. And I apologize I wasn't able to make it on that night, but I was putting on the friendship bracelets and glitter and everything to get ready for the show.
Hey, understandable completely, and you heard it here first, Smokey. Justin Williams is the Taylor Swift of the Athletic.
There you go. There you go. My favorite singer of all time, which is not even trying to compare it, but is because he's an incredible entertainer, was Elton John, or is Elton John, and he can go for hours. Like the rest of the band can leave, and he can still continue to play the piano, and that's kind of what I've heard, that she just goes and never stops. And I mean, you could talk about the money she makes the crowds, but she's an ultimate entertainer right now.
She is, and she puts on a great 3-hour show, and then you realize, like, wow, she has to wake up and do it again tomorrow, and then do it 100 other times based on all these tour dates she has. She can't really take a night off, because every time she does it, the people in the crowd, that's kind of their big moment. They want to come see it. So from that standpoint, from an entertainment, just dedication standpoint, it was pretty incredible.
So how much of a lift in the end will Texas and OU, who already recruited at an incredibly high level and are both doing just fine, and they'll get a bump, and they have in some cases won some head-to-heads because of the SEC, but they did that a lot anyway. Who will get the biggest bump among those two entering the SEC?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, when you talk to people around college football, like Texas, they're set up, right? They have everything you could possibly want from a location, from a resources, from a history standpoint, which is why it's been curious that it hasn't always, translated in the past couple of years onto the field. What was it? I know they're picked preseason number 1 in the Big 12 this year, and that's something that hadn't even happened for a while. Everyone in the Big 12 knows, how Texas has struggled based on, their standing and their resources. So, I on paper, I would think that it's going to be Texas who, if any of those teams are going to benefit from moving into the SEC a little bit more than they have in the past, I would pick Texas. But I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where, like, I'm like everyone else. I'd like to see Texas translated onto the field and have some success before I'm ready to crown them off of it.
Justin, great stuff. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Have a great week.
Anytime. Looking forward to seeing you guys in Jerry World for Big 12.
We will see you Wednesday and Thursday. Justin Williams, The Athletic. And did you hear the news today